Hey everyone, I'm Madonna Guy and this is David Sheil, kinesiologist, naturopath and holistic counsellor.
Hello, everyone.
We did a balance this morning for my kinesiology foundations class where David was the person on the table, and we ended up using the Moro reflex, which is to do with things that happen in the womb and in the first 4 months of life. And David, from a holistic counselling perspective, just kept making some interesting correlations between trauma and what we were finding on. And this is the mind map we did throughout the thing, like where are the things that have happened in his life, and then we use kinesiology to show, pinpoint, disprove what was and wasn't connected to the Moro reflex.
Mm-hmm.
So from a counselling perspective,
the first 4 months of your life, but also in the womb, so it's really the first 13 months of your life, things that happen in then do a range of things, like, because in the early part of our lives, all these bottom parts of the brain are developing, which are the primitive ones. And when
at the base of the neck and down the spine.
Right.
Yeah.
And when people have trauma in that period, firstly, they don't know what happened because it's before memory. And so these lower parts of the neural network are not developing as well. And they have to do with things like self-regulation. If you look at it from a counselling or psychological point of view, self-regulation and things like, because parents and children co-regulate, and so the co-regulation might be less. And so the neural networks in the bottom part of your brain may have some deficits, like the early parts of the midbrain too, I'm not sure which ones exactly grow, but the lower, and so people are often more dysregulated, harder to adjust to life, harder to work in relationships, unless you do work to fix it.
Yeah. And we were talking about the Moro reflex and the sort of things that it can impact on. So if we've got a jammed Moro reflex, which lots of people do, because there's so many things that happen in the first few months of life, babysitters, parent going back to work, vaccines, all sorts of little operations, siblings at home, exhaustion by the parents, so there's so many factors that can really impact on the bubbies.
Fairly common too, and it's not necessarily abuse. A lot of it's situational trauma.
Oh, absolutely. No. And I always say to parents, this is not something to feel guilty about. And in fact, I've been saying that to people for 30 years. This is not something to feel guilty about.
Because all of my stuff in the early time was situational.
Yeah.
Not really neglect or abuse. So it was more like the story was, I was born when I was taken to hospital.
Actually, tell the abandonment story. So because you've been doing Ian Fletcher's work, abandonment hasn't really been hitting home to you. It hasn't been feeling right.
Right. Well, I pieced these pieces together, which was my mum went to the hospital, and she's pressing the buzzer. Nobody came, so she gave birth to me by myself. I was born blue, so there was a lack of probably oxygen. And then, and she's screaming out, "You've killed him. He's not alive. He's blue," because everyone knows blue baby means no oxygen.
Yeah.
And so that was
no doctors or nurses around.
No one was here yet. And finally they came in and picked me up, and then I peed all over my mum. And so it's like you might normally think, and had my mum not told me the story, I wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
So you just have, because they've found with trauma, nearly all forms of trauma extend into your life, both psychologically and physically. Like in the ACE scores, they found that trauma would cause higher rates of heart disease, addiction, all types of things.
Yeah.
And so I was listening to one guy called Dr. K. He runs a podcast called Gamer GG. And he said this brilliant thing, that trauma is this chameleon that kind of sits behind every diagnosis. That's what he said. And so a lot of symptoms we had are very long-term from early in life. And another example is, like in my case, my brother had an accident when I was like not very old.
4 months old.
4 months old, and then the breast milk stopped then.
Yes.
And so.
Yeah. So anyway, we just wanted to share that it was an interesting session, and
it was very interesting and insightful, because you can get symptoms mixed up, like if you've got ADHD, they have rejection sensitivity, right? But then being the feeling of abandonment is like a slightly different thing. And if you can find the trauma root, it's easier to deal with it than look at it. It could be this or that, but ultimately there's some trauma behind it that's switching that on.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Mm-hmm. Anyway, just thought we'd share that because it was an interesting session.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.